Good morning, everyone. Good morning. We're ready to begin. So everybody can grab their treats and grab a seat. I want to welcome you all here today. And those on Zoom, there's maybe about 8 or 10 on Zoom right now. And my name is Preston Andrews. I am the president of the Kinnickinnick Native Plant Society. And we hold our monthly programs here, January through June, and then September through November. So different programs, different topics, and welcome again. Okay, I want to also thank those who gave us treats and hot drinks today. Isabel, especially for organizing this all the time. Robin Campbell, Mary Tolan, and Mary Knudsen all made cookies and treats for us. Thank you all. Okay. I want to begin with a land acknowledgement. I respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional homelands of the Kalispel, Kootenai, and Coeur d'Alene nations, who continue to live here and care for these lands, its waters, and its native plants and wildlife. We offer our thanks to these Indigenous people, their history and culture, as well as their continuing care for these lands for the generations to come. I have to apologize for this mic. We were supposed to have a lapel mic, but somehow it got misplaced in the library, so we're back to this handheld thing. Okay, I want to begin and say that the Lois Wythe Grant is open for applications. Patty Erickson is in charge of that committee. And the applications are due March 31st, and they're on the website. And last time we funded the Native Plant Demonstration Garden at the University of Idaho Sandpoint Organic Center. And that's a tour we took there. So that's online. Volunteer activities. We are, and as most of you know as members, we are a 100% volunteer organization. And so we need people to make this happen. And we do a lot of youth education in the Arboretum. And coming up in May is the 3rd grade tree tours that Cindy is organizing, Cindy Hayes. And you are going to pass around a sign-up sheet again? Okay, it's over there. So it's a lot of fun teaching 3rd graders about our native trees. And there's usually 250 spread out over these 3 days. So we don't get all of them at once, but we get plenty of exciting times with them. They're a lot of fun. The Arboretum, we are managed by an Arboretum leadership team, which has diminished in size to 2 of us, Ray Charlton and myself. And so we're looking for another or 2 volunteers to be part of that leadership team. And we'll have a spring cleanup coming up to prepare the Arboretum for the tree tours in May. So that'll probably be sometime in April or early May. The KNPS Board of Directors. We always need new people to help us keep this organization going. So if you are interested in that, we will have our board elections in June. And if you've been a board member, you can come back and be a board member again. Looking around the room, I see several. So please consider that as another volunteer opportunity. Upcoming events. Yesterday afternoon, evening, we sent out an email proposing bylaws amendments that have been approved by the board of directors. And we will have a special meeting before our March 18th program to approve those bylaws, if it is chosen by the membership. And we have to have a quorum here of a certain number of people. Yes, Patty. Does that mean only people who are paid up members can vote? Only paid up members can vote. Okay. So, vote. Yes. You should pay up. You can do that during the website. You can pay dues through the website, or you can mail a check to our post office box here in Sandpoint. We're going to continue the theme of water next month. Oh, in the landscape book? Oh, yes.
I have an announcement. have an opportunity for you. Many of you are out there with all kinds of work. The book has a cover photo, a back photo, and inside into this section, there's a group of photos. And we would love to have photos from all of you. So if you have photos, I'll leave my book up here. If you have photos that you can candidates for any of these spots, please. And if you have great photos of just lots of plants, we're also doing come see me. I can give you email address where you can email photos. So I'll leave the book up here. Thank you very much.
Yes, it's quite an endeavor revising a book that has been so popular through the years. So hands down to the committee and Robin for directing that effort. So we're going to be continuing our emphasis on water at our next at our March meeting, and that will be presented by Jennifer Ekstrom, who is the Idaho Conservation League's North Idaho Director, and it'll be about their Northern Lakes and Waters programs. And I know there's several of us in the room here, Ron, Shauna Laird, Patty, myself, that have collected samples in the water quality monitoring program for years for ICL around Lake Pend Oreille and on the Pend Oreille River. So it's important that we keep our waterways clean of sediment, of pesticides, of all things, which we'll hear about from Rachel today. If you're not a member, become a member. If you haven't renewed, renew and visit our web page and you can learn all about what we're doing. Let me introduce our speaker today, and she's coming to us from Big Fork, Montana, beautiful town up there on Flathead Lake. Rachel Malison, Dr. Malison, she grew up in northern Idaho. In fact, she grew up on Renko Loop. So she's a local here. She earned her Ph.D. in systems ecology at the University of Montana, and she's now an assistant research professor at the Flathead Lake Biological Station and in the Ecology and Evolution program at the University of Montana. And she's going to tell us today about the pioneering work they're doing in water monitoring, focusing on the headwaters of the Columbia River Basin. And you know, the Clark Fork comes from there, and it feeds our lake. So it impacts us as well. They are trying to seek a better understanding of the extent and effects of water contamination on the watershed. She's built up a network of partners collecting data to detect pesticides in the waterways and providing education on sustainable pesticide practices. And she'll highlight the implications of pesticide contamination on waterways, including on wildlife and adjacent land areas. So I am going to stop sharing my screen, and we're going to transfer this to Rachel. Stop sharing. There.
Thanks, Preston.
That off there. Whenever you're ready, and I have to switch the mic, the speakers over to the monitor here. Oops. Okay.
Are you able to see that slide?
No, I lost it now. Can you?
We can see.
It's up.
No. The speaker here.
Oh.
It's right now on my laptop, but you won't hear it. So if you can minimize a minute, and I'll get that changed on my system settings.
Sorry, do you want me to stop sharing?
Yeah, just for a second while I okay, great. I have to change it to this Samsung here. Okay. Now you should be ready to go.
Okay. All right, let me know if that is back up for you.
We're not getting.
Is the sound working?
Well, it's still on our. No.
It looks like it's up there. no green light on the speaker. Be a yellow light.
On the speaker, where are you talking about?
We're talking at the bar there on the bottom of the black thing on the bottom of the screen.
No, the black
Hardware.
down the wall. On the wall.
I'm guessing it's your end because you were hearing me before.
Thank you.
It's clearly.
I heard something.
Is that working now?
Is it on?
I would think you still need a green light.
I can't see it. You got it? You see it? I can't see it here.
Don't anybody breathe.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Your
Okay.
volume control on that?
There is a volume control.
Technology is always the hardest part.
I think it's my computer is still seeing my speakers. Let's see. Samsung, right there. Try again, Sam.
How about that?
Hey!
All right, we've passed the hardest part right now. Okay, so we're all good to go?
Good to go.
Okay, perfect. All right. Good morning, everyone. Sorry I couldn't be there in person. My family would have liked that better probably, but I just couldn't make the trip this weekend. Like Preston said, I grew up in Sandpoint and now I call Montana home, and I will be talking to you about our Pesticide Stewardship Partnership Program and some of our water quality monitoring efforts at the biological station here out of Polson and Big Fork. So why are we here today? Really, it's a focus on pesticides. That's not the only thing I'm concerned about in water, but that's the program that we're focused on today. So I'm going to talk about how their use can impact our water resources, share more about my program, and then also share information to help folks understand, how our different land uses influence water and learn about different options for reducing pesticide pollution in waters. So first of all, I'm located at the Flathead Lake Biological Station. So that's on the east shore of Flathead Lake in Yellow Bay. And the biostation was founded in 1899. It's actually the second oldest biological station in the entire US by only 1 year. So we're almost the oldest biological station. And our vision for the station is really we aim to be global leaders in aquatic research and education, inspiring curiosity, really deepening the understanding of waters and the watersheds around us, and working to empower current and future generations to responsibly steward our fresh waters and even the oceans of the world. So the station was established in 1899 by Dr. Morton Elrod. He was the first biology professor at the University of Montana, wrote one of the first guidebooks for Glacier National Park. And it was really amazing that he founded the station when he did. So we celebrated our 125th anniversary in 2024. We also have summer classes. So if any of you know college students looking for great opportunities, our classes are in the field and students can learn about ecology by hiking mountains and floating rivers. And it's just an amazing opportunity. I took all the aquatic courses actually as an undergraduate myself and have helped teach them. So that's a great opportunity for college students. Our mission at the station is to really advance the understanding of water and the life that depends on it, creating and sharing knowledge locally and globally with everyone from students, from K through 12 students to researchers to our community. So a lot of people talk about Flathead Lake. Does someone have a question or is that just a feedback maybe I'm hearing?
I think, yeah, I think this is Zoom.
Feedback?
Yeah, everybody on Zoom that's would just mute your microphone, please.
I can also mute them too.
Okay.
Let me check real quick. Okay, that looks good. Sorry. So anyways, when people think of the biostation, they're often thinking about Flathead Lake, which this picture is of Flathead Lake. But there's a lot more to what we do at the station, and there's a lot more water in Montana than just the water in Flathead Lake. Are you able to see my cursor if I use it as a pointer at all? Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. I'm circling it around Flathead Lake right now. Can you see anything? No, it's fine. It's not that big of a deal. Do you want to unmute, Preston, or do you just want to unmute if you have a question?
No, I can unmute, but yeah, that was my cursor sitting there.
Okay, sounds good. I'll just be descriptive enough in my words then. So Flathead Lake is kind of that bigger blue blob on the upper left portion of Montana. And so that's definitely where we're based, but a lot of the programs that I work on are expand throughout the entire state of Montana. And that's because our waters in Montana are a really important resource. Most people really appreciate the water that we have and all the opportunities that it provides. But not only does it provide opportunities for people to have a healthy environment to enjoy and recreate in, it also is home to a lot of different organisms. So we have mayflies and caddisflies and stoneflies are just three of the aquatic insect orders that live in our streams and rivers. And these are some pictures and examples of them. And those aquatic insects are a really important part of the food web. So I have them circled there in this little chart that really shows how when the insects are living in the water, they eat algae and leaves. They can feed fish in the river. They then hatch out as adults into the air, and they can feed birds and bats and spiders. And so aquatic insects are a really important part of rivers and streams, but they also really serve to connect the water to the land around the water. And so these are really important connected systems. So they can feed fish, all these other organisms. But what happens when we live on the land as humans is that all of our actions can influence that water, and that can have effects for how we can use water and the ecological communities that live in water as well. So just by being human, different actions like farming and agriculture, construction, industry, all the residential areas, our yards, all of our different practices on the land can influence the water because things can be picked up by the water after it rains and can run off into the rivers and or go down into the groundwater and into our surface waters as well. So water quality is really important to understand. Preston mentioned it before, so a lot of you are probably quite familiar with this already. But luckily, Montana does greatly value our water resources and recognizes the importance of them from the perspective of humans for public health, safety, quality of life, drinking water, recreation, of course, fish and wildlife too, which is where I tend to focus more of my work. And understanding how clean and safe our water is really important for assessing ecosystem health. So you might look at these pictures and correctly assume that these systems are not that healthy at the moment when these pictures were taken. So there were impacts going on that have resulted in algae blooms or too much sediment in the water or other things like that. But you can't always just look at the water and see that there might be a problem. So monitoring is really important to be able to understand what's in our water, to be able to detect pollutants, especially a lot of pollutants that you can't just see by looking out at the river. So it might look clean, but we don't actually know what's dissolved in that water. So Monitoring Montana Waters is another program that I run at the biostation. It was launched in 2021. And it's philanthropically funded, and it really supports volunteer water quality monitoring throughout the state of Montana. So I'm happy to hear that some of you have been helping with monitoring and taking samples in Idaho. This is a really important thing because in Montana in particular, we have a lot of water, a lot of it's hard to reach, and there just are not enough resources that our agencies have to collect the data that are needed to protect our waters. So volunteers play a really critical role in Montana. but they have to receive all of the training and information that they need in order to make a difference. So our Monitoring Montana Waters programs directly supports volunteer water quality monitoring. So I'm the lead of that program. Callie Nelson is my 2026 Big Sky Watershed Corps member. So this is an AmeriCorps program that is focused specifically on water in Montana. There's about 50 of these members throughout the state. And then there's a couple other folks at the station, Tom and Aaron, that help provide support as well. So through MMW, we really can increase the capacity of water quality monitoring in Montana. We provide guidance, funding, and training for these groups so that the data that they collect are known to be scientifically credible. Their data are uploaded into the state database and they can be used for management decisions by the Department of Environmental Quality and help protect our waters. So the reason I'm telling you about MMW is because this basically set the stage for then expanding our monitoring efforts to pesticides. So I showed this picture earlier that what we're doing on the landscape can really influence our waters. Things like pharmaceuticals, medicals, PFAS, these emerging contaminants. They call them emerging contaminants. They've been emerging for 60 years. I don't know why we're still calling them emerging contaminants. They've been around. But regardless, when you hear emerging contaminants, we're thinking PFAS, things like that, and pesticides. And in Montana, and I would argue Idaho as well, and many other places, we just don't have good monitoring programs for these things. DEQ has actually done a better job with metals, but there's no statewide program for monitoring for pharmaceuticals, PFAS, or pesticides. So it's kind of been out of sight, out of mind. And we have, a lot of potential contamination that we don't really know about. And this is important for a number of reasons, but just to show one citation of a study, there's been global declines in insect biodiversity, and some of the reasons that this is thought to have happened is linked to contaminants like this. So I'm talking mostly about pesticides today. This is a figure that my research coordinator put together just to illustrate that, pesticides are applied on the landscape. So the gray box on this figure is representing some sort of targeted use of pesticides. So people are trying to get rid of some sort of problem. But the pesticides don't often just stay where they're used. And so the challenge comes in the fact that they can run off into surface water, they can get into the soil, then the groundwater, then the surface water. They can drift, they can go through the air, they can be deposited in water. And it's all very complicated because different pesticides have different characteristics, and that can all influence how they get to water. But that's a problem. So the Clean Water Act was enacted in 1972, but we still have the threat of pesticides today. By 2017, 1 billion pounds of active ingredient was used per year in the US. It's just a staggering amount of pesticides that are used. And, there's agricultural and residential sources. So often when we start to talk about these things with people, they automatically think agriculture. That's what they are concerned about. But the sources from residential use can actually even be higher in some cases than agricultural uses, because it's just this massive amount that are put on the landscape. And these things are designed to kill specific organisms, so like pests, weeds, fungal diseases. And I often forget to say that when I'm talking about pesticides, we're not just talking about insecticides. Pesticides represents all the sides. So insecticides, herbicides, fungicides, rodenticides, there's many, many different kinds. So sometimes people will say, okay, I don't use pesticides. I just, spray my weeds. I'm like, well, that's an herbicide and that's a type of pesticide. So we're really talking about all of these things. So the thing that makes it difficult for our freshwater organisms is that the pesticides are targeting certain things, but they're equally effective at killing non-target organisms like those mayflies and caddisflies that I showed you earlier. And we have very little baseline data because our agencies don't have the funds to go out and sample for these. And pesticides in particular are very expensive to analyze. So it's not surprising that they haven't done it. We don't have specific regulations in place for pesticides. A nutrient sample might cost $20 or $30 to analyze in the lab, whereas one bottle of water for pesticides can cost $400 to $1,200, depending on the lab that we're using. So, despite these challenges, if we don't know the risk, we don't know what pesticides are in our waters, we're not going to know if our actions are going to make a difference. And so why is this all important? It's really important because all of the actions that we make on land, whether it's specifically applying herbicides or changing how we use the land right next to water, can influence our water quality. And there's so many different sources of pesticides, from lawns to municipalities to agriculture to farming. And that it's a really challenging situation because all of these sources can add up cumulatively to influence our water. And, some people care about aquatic insects as much as I do, but not everybody. So it's also important from just the standpoint of we want to be able to enjoy our water, recreate in healthy waters, and have clean water. And really, clean water is essential for all of life, our communities, and our ecosystems. So I always make sure I talk a little bit about watersheds, just to really tie this back for people. So if you're not familiar with the term, a watershed is the area of land where all the water that falls in it drains off and goes out to a common outlet. So if you have the divide around you, this is an example of a watershed. The water that falls within that dotted yellow boundary is going to either flow over the land or go into the ground, and all of it eventually will come out that common outlet where you see the bridge and the canoe there in this image. And so a lot of watershed ecology is understanding how all of these things interact and all of these different human impacts, like farming, urban development. And, people often think of urban as just big cities, but even suburban and rural areas with people living on them, logging, and much more. And so all of this results in non-point source pollution. And that's just the term that we use to describe this type of pollution that I was explaining earlier, where we have a lot of different sources and they can all add up. So pollution from many places at once. It can come from runoff into water. It's hard to trace and hard to control. So we have permits in place and things that allow specific discharges of pollutants from things like factories or wastewater treatment plants. And those are considered point source pollution, and it can be measured and documented. But the type of pollution that comes from broad pesticide use can't be documented like that because it's coming broadly from the entire landscape. And that really results in the fact that our actions affect the land and the water that connects us. So I mentioned Monitoring Montana Waters, and that's our program that really is more of the basic monitoring. So nutrients that can cause algal blooms and sediment and E. coli, and some of those I would call more basic metrics. But there are many types of pollutants that can enter our waterways, and more than what we can support through our MMW program. And so these are the pharmaceuticals, the metals, the PFAS, pesticides that I mentioned earlier. And because of this challenge of all these other pollutants causing problems, but not having enough resources, I took the opportunity to write an EPA grant application starting in 2022. I think it was early 2022 that I started it. And it was a program, so that this is what funded our Pesticide Stewardship Partnership program that we have now. And it was titled Reducing Toxics in the Upper Columbia River Basin of Montana through a Pesticide Stewardship Partnership program. So this is a huge effort. It's $6.6 million of federal money, and then there's $2.2 million of non-federal cost match. So we have a lot of partners that are helping bring resources that are not federal to the table as well. It's a 5-year grant, but we're actually extending it for another year. So it'll end in October of 2029 with this particular funding. So I'm the program lead. We have Janelle Graff as my full-time research coordinator. And so she's helping run the program day to day. And then Paige there on the right is our newest Big Sky Watershed Corps member for PSPP. And so she's just started in January. The members serve from January to November each year. And so what is our PSPP? It's really a collaborative network in Western Montana working to reduce pesticide pollution in our waters through sustainable best practices. So it supports water quality monitoring, community education and engagement, and other activities to improve water quality. Before I go further into what our program actually does, I think it's important to always pause and recognize that pesticides are a tool. They do have important uses for crop production and livestock management, disease control, managing forest pests, sometimes aquatic invasive species. Um, so they aren't just going to go away. And our program isn't advocating that they completely go away because that's not realistic. And we're really trying to work together with everyone to improve the situation for our waters. But what we do talk a lot about is that pesticides aren't the only option to achieve these things and manage our land. And that there's a lot of other integrated strategies that we can use to control pests effectively and responsibly. So a lot of our education and outreach is talking about all of these things. And if I was in the room with you right now and I can actually see everyone, well, I would ask you how many of you have a Swiss Army knife? I imagine some of you might have one. Okay, good. I see Preston's hand up. And so Preston, what tool do you use out of your Swiss Army knife most often?
The corkscrew.
Okay, you guys are that audience. Most of my audiences say the knife because
Yeah,
that's
I would
what
say
you
the
take
knife.
out of the Swiss Army knife the most often. Even if you might need to loosen up a screw, the screwdriver would work better, but the knife is just so convenient because it comes out the easiest. So we often use this example to share how even though the knife is the most convenient and used the most often, there's maybe 18 other tools that could be used possibly more appropriately for the problem, but the knife is what just comes out. So the pesticides are kind of like the knife of the Swiss Army tool. You know they're going to do the job. They're easy to go grab at the store and to apply, but there are other options. So we really like to, talk to people about if pesticides are the tool that's appropriate, how can we make sure that they know the best practices to be followed? So, our work is focused on the Columbia River Basin, and that's because this funding can only be spent in the Columbia River Basin. And the 12 counties of Montana that fall in the headwaters of the Columbia Basin are kind of this western, northwestern portion of Montana. And that's where our work is active because that's just where the funds can be spent. We're really hoping that we can expand our efforts farther east in Montana, but that requires additional resources that we're working on. But like Preston mentioned, the Clark Fork flows into Idaho. So what happens in Montana matters to waters in Idaho as well, and then further downstream. So close to us in the Flathead, we have the three forks of the Flathead, the North Fork, Middle Fork, and South Fork. Those are flowing into Flathead Lake, the river, the Clark Fork, the Columbia, and down to the Pacific Ocean. And so that's why we were able to access this funding. So 12 counties in Montana is where we're really focused. We have a little bit of work going on in the Kootenai watershed in North Idaho as well, just because the Kootenai goes from Montana to Idaho. And we had some partnerships with the Kootenai Tribe of Idaho. And we're really, working in the headwaters of the Columbia. So to get this funding, we had to meet certain categories that the EPA was interested in. And the ones that were relevant for us were eliminating or reducing pollution, improving water quality, promoting citizen engagement or knowledge. And then certain priorities had to be met as well. And so those that we focused on were agricultural best practices, green infrastructure, and community education and outreach. And this figure on the right might be a little bit hard to see depending on how big the screen is in your room. But really, our program is quite broad. It's as broad as we could make it to try and engage anyone who would be willing to work on this with us. But really starting up at the top panel, understanding land uses and doing GIS mapping work, and then doing a lot of monitoring, implementing projects, which I'll talk about, and then more monitoring towards the end. So a big part of what we're doing is designing and mapping out a monitoring plan to collect samples across various land use types. And we got quite a lot of funding to do the monitoring, even though they didn't want to fund monitoring. They just wanted to fund the implementation of actions. But if you don't know what's in the water, you don't know if you're making a difference. So we're collaborating with a lot of different groups to help with volunteers for sample collection. We really want to understand what pesticide concentrations are across the basin and then be able to share our data online. And it's important to think about the different land uses because different pest problems or different land uses result in different pesticides being used, which have different is just the common word, right for this situation, because there's a whole plethora of pesticides that can be used and they have different properties and can enter water in various ways and affect aquatic organisms depending on their characteristics. So we have basic baseline monitoring. We're monitoring near hotspots where we think we might find more. We have different research projects going on, and the tribes are collecting fish tissue even to try and understand if there might be a human consumption issue. So the first part of this has been a lot of GIS work with Diane Whited at the biological station, really trying to understand land use and coming up with some of these risk scores, because when you're trying to sample 12 counties and you might collect 600 or 700 samples a year, which is a lot of samples to collect. Actually, it's not that many in the big landscape that we're trying to cover. So coming up with a systematic way to sample. And then another thing that we took about a year to do was to write this 1,000-page quality assurance project plan, or QAP, that had to be approved by the EPA before we could even monitor. So there's a lot that goes into these plans to develop the monitoring and get approval so that the data can be uploaded and used. So in the 12 counties in Montana, we had 25 focal sites that we really went to every 2 weeks or 1 month last year, surrounded by different types of land use. And we focused on sampling at public access sites because it's pretty difficult to connect with enough landowners to get private access when you're trying to cover such a broad area. We also had a lot of different baseline sites, so different types of categories of land use like forest, ag, urban, suburban, and then discrete type land uses like golf courses, airports, etc. When you do this type of work, you also have to get permission. For example, the national forests, we had to get permission from all the different national forests to just even access the sites and sample. And then the field work last summer was led by Chloe. She was our Big Sky member, and she collected, I think it ended up being close to 600 samples from all sorts of different habitats throughout the Columbia River Basin, which was just a gigantic effort on her part, especially with how many times we repeatedly went back to some sites. And the reason that we did that was because the land use can change over time as well. And so there can be seasonal differences in what pesticides might be in the water. And the samples, this is what they actually look like. So it's a glass 1 liter amber jar, which is challenging for shipping samples to the lab because glass can break easily, but this is the type of container that the pesticide samples have to be collected in. And then we have a code for every site so we can keep track of where the sample came from. So you might wonder, did we find any pesticides? The answer is yes, we have. So just a caveat, we have a ton of data. We're just starting to plot it and look into what we're finding. But we are finding pesticides. These are different focal sites on the x-axis of this graph. So all of those main focal gauging station locations, and then the different colors are different types of pesticides. And so you might wonder why 2 of the sites have a lot more detections. And that one was in Butte and one was Ashley Creek in the Flathead. So those are both urban suburban areas where we're actually finding the most detections so far. Also, this data only goes up to August. We do sample April through November. I just didn't get a chance to update these plots yet, but we did have the most detections in June. And the top pesticides that we detected were 2,4-D, imazapyr, prometon, and tebutherion. And if you guys can say these names better than I can, that's okay. Forgive me for butchering them. And then just highlighting some of these sites. Again, it was the one in Kalispell, in Ashley Creek, the one in Butte, and then also a site on the Clark Fork had some pretty high detections. So it's kind of hard to understand what this all means if you don't really know what the pesticides are, and there's so many of them, it can be hard to understand. So just briefly to share some of these things, 2,4-D was one of the highest detections. It's an herbicide. It's used on broadleaved weeds, powder or liquid form. It's very water soluble, and it has crop and non-crop uses, so agriculture and residential. Aminocyclopyrachlor is an herbicide, woody weeds, some cropland. So again, kind of a mixed use. Atrazine is another herbicide, and you'll notice that I think all the ones I'm going to share right now are herbicides because that's what we're primarily detecting in the water. So another water soluble one used for broadleaf weeds and grasses, mostly in cropland. Bentazone, another herbicide, post-emergence applications. So when the plants are starting to bloom. Imazapyr is another herbicide, and it's not used in cropland, so that's more urban suburban use. And Prometon is another herbicide, non-selective, non-cropland, so more homeowner use. And Tebutherian is another herbicide. Some of you might be familiar or wonder about glyphosate, especially how much that one has been in the news lately. And I don't know if you heard, but maybe 2 days ago, there was a new executive order to increase the production of glyphosate in this country. There's been linked to cancer, things like that. We don't actually have any data on glyphosate yet because it's an entirely different test, a different sample, and a couple hundred more dollars. So we are actively thinking about how we can implement that into our monitoring program, but we can't afford to do it everywhere. So we are thinking about it. We just haven't had a chance to collect those samples yet. Okay, so that was kind of just a brief overview of the monitoring part. Another big part of this program is implementing projects. So we have these major partners that we issued subawards to, which means a lot of the funding was then given to these organizations. We have different programs that are being supported, like waste disposal, pesticide waste disposal programs, green infrastructure, research on leaching, the human health impacts, and a lot of education and outreach. And so the 7 subawards that we wrote into this project were with Montana Department of Ag. They're a huge partner. They brought a lot of that non-federal cost match in. We have the waste pesticide disposal program that we're helping fund. And so they actually go around into different cities throughout the year and have collection events. So if you have old raid cans or partially full containers of pesticides, or you have an old shed that's been having questionable things in it for a very long time, they will take those things and dispose of them. They also have a container recycling program. So a lot of the agricultural producers will have these big containers of pesticides come in. And so they will actually recycle those containers. And then the groundwater protection program, they do sample wells within the Columbia River Basin as well. DEQ is helping with a lot of education and outreach. They're also helping with some efforts to create more buffer strips or putting native plants closer to water and replacing turf grass and lawns. The Montana Watershed Coordination Council is helping with networking and education and outreach. And then MSU, I have a colleague there who has a master's student who is actually studying leaching to understand how the pesticides are moving through the soil with different irrigation practices. And then they have a whole pesticide education program, and they work with licensed users. So if you are a producer, you often have to have a pesticide license, and those folks actually get a lot of training and have to earn so many credits a year. And so we're working with that program to help draw the focus on water a little bit more clearly. And then the tribes, the fish tissue and food web analysis, and then the city of Missoula, a big green stormwater infrastructure project. And so here's some pictures of the stormwater project for the city of Missoula. So this is Takema Park. And if you're not familiar with stormwater in cities, often it just runs off the streets and goes into pipes and enters the river. So there's a lot of contaminants that can enter the river. Green infrastructure is a way to basically build man-made wetlands. So the picture on the bottom right was in progress, that's not finished. But building this wetland to help slow down the water and have it move through the wetland and be treated and remove some of those contaminants before they enter the river. This is a picture of the new permanent grinder station that the MDA is putting in at the Lake County Wheat District. And so before this, they just had a truck that drove around and would often break down. So we're helping them get their first permanent location installed for the container recycling. And then here's some pictures of the lysimeter research where they have these, the lysimeter, it's basically a way for samples of water to be collected from the soil at different depths. And then they can study how what pesticides are found at different layers of the soil and relate that to how the land's being managed. So those are just a few of the examples of projects that we're funding and collaborating on. And then we also have funds that we are still awarding. So groups like conservation districts or wheat districts or watershed groups can apply for these funds to implement projects. So maybe someone has a stretch of stream that there's a landowner that, has ag or some use right up to the stream edge and there's no riparian vegetation. They could apply for funding to put a buffer strip in or something like that, or education and outreach events. So that is a bunch of the type of actions, projects, monitoring that we're doing. And I hopefully after all this, we will continue monitoring and be able to measure some measurable differences in the pesticides in the water, make the data available, publish results, and hopefully find ways to continue expanding the program throughout the state. We also have a lot of outreach efforts. So we have a monthly newsletter. I know you guys aren't in Montana, but our water comes to you. So if any of you be interested in getting our monthly newsletter, you could, I could send a link to Preston and he could share it with you to sign up for that. We don't spam people with anything else. It's just the newsletter once a month. We have monthly Teams meetings where we can virtually meet with all of our partners. And we have an annual meeting at the station in October, which is a pretty cool opportunity for us to get together with all the different types of people that care about this, the land managers, producers, academics, all sorts of folks are coming together to think about ideas to make a difference. We also try to reach the community any way we can. It's really important that we reach people, and it's hard to have enough time to reach enough people. So talks like this, tabling at events, and all sorts of things like that. So what can you do directly? Thinking about protecting our water, following best practices. What are those best practices? I'll talk about those for just a few minutes. Exploring integrated pest management. I'll talk about that a little bit too. And then if you live right on the water or have property that goes right to the water, thinking about buffer zones or no spray zones and knowing your best practices. So again, our message isn't that you can't use pesticides, but it's not saying that you cannot use pesticides, but there are other options. And if you do use them, let's know the best practices. So if you're not familiar with the term buffer zones, this is really the vegetated interface between the water and the dry land. So in this image, it's also called the riparian area. So we have the water, which is in the stream, and then the upland where you see that more like the spruce tree up there on the top, and that zone in between there, you have different plants growing in the riparian zone. And so this picture on the right-hand side, you can see the water and you can see more of the natural habitat and plants present in between the water and the farm field there. And these buffer zones are really important ecologically. They protect the water, they prevent drift of pesticides from coming into the water. This is an image that the Flathead Conservation District uses. They provide habitat for wildlife. They keep water colder by providing shade. They stabilize the banks so that you don't have as much erosion and sediment coming into the water. So there's just a lot of really good reasons to leave riparian zones intact, but there's a lot of times that they aren't present anymore. So if you do have a healthy riparian zone, leave it alone is the best option. Sometimes you can see pictures of houses falling into rivers where they've been they've cut down the riparian zone and built really close. That can happen. That's a bit extreme. But then if you have a place where there is no riparian zone, doing plantings, adding willows, and repairing that buffer width can really make a big difference in protecting the water. And this little graph on the left is really small and probably hard to see, but the idea is the wider that riparian zone, the more protection we have for our water. So the kind of the shortest distance is the banks are stabilized, to the biggest distances there's wildlife habitat, and kind of intermediate in there is less nutrients get in the water, less sediments get in the water, less things like pesticides can get in the water as well. So best practices. I all can't see you guys to ask this question, but in person, I like to ask how many people do their own yard maintenance and how many people hire a company like True Green. So I can't really do that very well in the Zoom setting right now. But I'm usually asking this just to think about, what are the land use practices and what are your, typical way of managing your land. So if you are doing using any kind of pesticides, herbicides, it's possible to think about, modifying the frequency of spraying, how often you're spraying. So I think it's pretty common. I've been told that some companies like True Green might come 4 times as in the summer and spray fertilizers and pesticides, and that's the goal of having this bright green perfect lawn. And so a lot of these conversations come down to social scientists, and I'm not a social scientist at all, but starting to at least have the conversation about what are our expectations and could we tolerate a little bit of weeds and spray less frequency and reduce the amount of pesticides that are getting into our water, and just starting to have those conversations with people and our neighbors. Another thing to think about is knowing how much and when to water. So if you do have a company come spray, have they ever told you how long to wait before you're watering? Have you thought about that? The more watering that's done can result in more leaching. So when I talked to an HOA that was right next to Flathead Lake, one of the landowners had never thought about how often he watered, and the fact that the water table was very high, and what he had on his lawn and watering a lot could really get it right in the groundwater and right into Flathead Lake. So these are just important things to think about, the frequency and the length, and then considering other options. So, people enjoy yards like this, but sometimes we can replace turf grass with native grass seed mixes. Also, native plant gardens are a great option. And, even if someone doesn't want to replace their whole yard, maybe part of their yard could be replaced with native plant gardens. And that benefits pollinators too, like bees and other organisms. And then if you're doing it yourself, knowing the correct chemicals. And I need to actually update this because knowing what the pest is the first question, actually. So do you know what the problem is? Have you identified what the weed species is, for example? And that's really important to know because different types of weeds need different treatment. So, for example, knapweed needs to be sprayed after the first frost in the fall. And if you spray it another time, it's not effective. And so often, if people don't know the proper procedure to take, then a lot of extra chemicals can be put on the ground that aren't needed. So that's the right timing, the right amount. More is not always better. And I think that's a pretty normal human thing. More is better. That's not the case with pesticides. And then you can also have risk to trees. So things like milestone and dicamba that can be used to treat yards. In some cases, neighborhoods are like, why are our trees all dying? And it's because these chemicals were sprayed too closely to trees, and then the trees are lost as well. There's a lot of other resources like the county weed districts and conservation districts. And I'm not familiar with what's available in Sandpoint or Idaho. But in Montana, we have our county weed districts with specific people that are actually in charge of noxious weeds. So I met our noxious weed coordinator when she stopped at my house and said she was going to have to write me a letter to say that I was going to be in trouble because of my oxeye daisies that we had in our field. So it's actually against the law in Montana to propagate noxious weeds. So we have to deal with the weeds, but making sure we do it in a way that best protects our water. And then there's also a lot of resources from like extension agents that can help people understand best choices for ornamental vegetation and lawn weeds. And then our conservation districts have a lot of great initiatives like native pollinator seeds and rain garden resources and other habitats. So reducing the pesticide use or replacing the grass, all of these things have more benefits than just to water, but they can also benefit other native species as well. And then we also talk to people about integrated pest management. So this is often, if you Google this, you'll come across a lot of information for agricultural production. But there's things that we can know just with reference to our yards as well. So what's the pest? Is it really causing a problem? You know, what's the threshold where you would really need to take action? Maybe a few of them are okay, but if there's too many, then you need to do something. And then these other types of control methods. So, you know, in some settings, biological control can be done. So like certain insects can be introduced to eat the knapweed. That's not realistic in a yard, but there are lots of different types of methods that can be used. So just in summary, why is this all important? For so many reasons, but from the one that we really focus on is our healthy watersheds, providing clean water and supporting communities, offering recreational opportunities, drinking water, irrigation, agriculture, all of these different uses need water of various, you don't have to have as clean a water for agriculture as you do for drinking water. But we still want to make sure our water is available for all the different uses and really to support our aquatic ecosystems that need clean water. So actions that you can take, you know, really thinking about, is there an opportunity to reduce the chemical use? Is waste being disposed of properly, taking advantage of any kind of disposal programs and supporting other conservation efforts. So we have a lot of options that if you guys are, again, interested in the monthly newsletter, let us know. Volunteering to collect our samples is probably not going to work since you're in Sandpoint, but I'm glad you have other opportunities for that in your area. And then I'd be really happy to know if anyone wanted to reach out later, you know, are there resources that you think would be helpful? We're always trying to figure out what we can provide for the best education and outreach, and hearing from people is really helpful for that. So I'd be happy to take a few questions if you have the time. I know we're getting